Okay, everyone, in 225, this is an exercise in Vasari where we're going to build custom windroses based on weather climate data adjacent to our site. This is going to allow us to set up some experiments with wind and just give us a good opportunity to mine some data about how wind is going to help our building perform on site. So what we're going to do is underneath the Analyze tab, after we have sort of our massing model and our site in place, we're going to click Ecotech Windrows. So once I have this in my view, I'm going to change my view mode to satellite, and I'm going to zoom in to our site location, which again was Jubilee Park. And just right there, I have a pretty decent graphic already set up with an annual windrows overlaid on our site. Now the problem is the default windrows is going to open and look something like this. That is a 365 day a year, 24-hour per day windrows, which is really kind of arbitrary information in terms of a climate that has massive changes throughout the year, like what we have here in Springfield, Missouri. So we want to be able to change and modify this in a couple of different ways. The first thing that I want to do, though, is actually look at where this weather data is coming from. And I can do that pretty easily by clicking this Lock Map to Weather Station Location. So I'm going to click that and notice that it moves the data collection station away from the site. This is by default, it's going to choose the closest weather data collection station. I'm going to click off of the lock, and then I'm going to zoom out, and I'd like to kind of see exactly what it is that or where this data is coming from. And I notice, it's pretty close to our site. The site should come into view here in just a second in the top left. But it's kind of in this valley, and that sort of concerns me a little bit, because the terrain of this location could be impacting how that wind is going to function. So I'm kind of curious as to whether or not there might be a better way to get weather data in a location that's still close, but might have similar terrain as our site, which is reasonably flat. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to go back to the location map. And if you notice on this map, I've got a series of weather data stations, and this one is almost as close, and that one just happens to be at the Springfield Airport, which I know is also fairly flat and open. So I think that location just might actually give me data that's a little bit more similar to what we're going to have on our site. So with that selected, I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to open the Ecotech Windrows again. And sure enough, there's a pretty dramatic change right off the bat in terms of how this windrows looks. Now the next thing that I want to do is narrow the windrows down to do 2 different times of day and 2 different times of year. So let's look at wind data from, let's say, mid-May to mid-July, and also from, let's say, about 9 o'clock until somewhere around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And you can notice there's a really dramatic shift in terms of where the wind is coming from. It's really coming out of the north-northwest, and that's really important data for me to know, because that is the wind that I really want to be able to capture. So again, to bring this into my project as a visual, as something that I can work with and log into a journal, I can do a screen capture from this location, but I can also import this directly onto my Revit model. So I'm going to go ahead and click Send Windrows to BIM Project. I'm going to accept the defaults and say OK. I'm going to wait a couple of seconds for the results. And now I have that windrows overlaid directly onto my model, which makes for a really nice graphic. Again, something that I can go ahead and get a good screen rendering of and keep that in my journal log. So I'm going to go do one more thing. I'm going to go back to the windrows. And this time what I'm going to do is let's look at the winter months. So I'm going to take my slider, my month slider, and I'm going to move that across, and let's look at December to January. And again, we can see a pretty dramatic shift in the wind pattern, where the wind is coming more from the south to the north and more from the west to the east. And those are winds that during those months we might want to be thinking more about blocking than capturing like we would in some of the cooler summer months. So again, that would be another graphic that I could build as well. When you do this, you want to make sure that you're doing a file save as and keeping this massing data separate, because this windrows geometry, Vasari is going to try and use that as part of your building simulation, which is basically going to make it throw up. So at some point in time, we need to be able to have this file saved, and then we need to delete the windrows back out of our file in order to run an accurate simulation.